In today's show, you're watching Sport on Singapore. It is the show about all things Singapore sport. Welcome to Sport on Singapore. We're going to start off today's show with swimming in the FINA Swimming World Cup. And joining us today is former Team Singapore swimmer Roanne Ho. Welcome, Roanne.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's no better person to start swimming with than, of course, the golden boy, Joseph Schooling. And Roanne, he only took part in the 200-meter individual medley. Didn't win anything, but it's part of a bigger process of building himself up in the middle distance race to lead up towards the Tokyo Olympics. A smart move on his part?
Well, I guess it's not really for me to say, but I'm sure that him and his coaches have a plan, and if they have the long-term view of Olympics in mind and he's training his middle distance in order to get faster in 100, then yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Of course, it wasn't just Joseph Schooling that was competing for Team Singapore at the event. We also had some very good performances from Hua Jing-wen, who rewrote her record, the national record as well, in the 200-meter butterfly, which was previously set at the Tokyo leg of the series. Just another question maybe for Roanne in the context of this being the year of the SEA Games. Which competition in the larger context takes precedence when you have to take on so many competitions?
Actually, I think most of the swimmers are probably focusing more on Tokyo 2020 next year. But obviously this year SEA Games would be the most important one for us. When we go for so many competitions, it's not so much having to perform all the time, but it's more of getting into that racing mindset, getting that experience, that racing experience, so that you know how to deal with like different circumstances when it comes down to it. Yeah. So it's mostly just for experience.
So what a great way of putting it. I do recall you making a post on Instagram during last year's Asian Games about pressure, about how elite sport, there's so much pressure and that fine line between success and what is deemed as failure in the eyes of many, but and the amount of pressure that athletes have to go through. So that being said as well, swimming being the sport that usually for Singapore is the sport that brings back the biggest haul of medals at any major games for us. How do athletes from the swim team usually deal with that expectation? Or is it something that doesn't even really cross into their minds? Like you said, it's about exposure, it's about gaining experience. Which one, like how do you deal with that?
I guess for different people would just deal with pressure differently. Like some people, they need the pressure in order to perform well, but some people would just crack under pressure. So I think for us, we are lucky in the sense where most of us, or actually all of us, have a really good support system in terms of having a psychologist and like coaches that constantly check in to make sure that we are okay. But I think each of us are told some coping mechanisms for whenever the pressure gets too great, and it's just a matter of applying it. When it comes to race days itself, I mean, we know that we have each other's back, so that always helps. Yeah.
There was also joy in the Singapore mixed team freestyle race with the team coming in second, just pipping China for silver. Tell me more about the team. I hear it's a little bit of a mix between experience and youth, so the two of them combining well to get glory for Singapore.
Yeah, I think we have two juniors, Darren and Shalin. They are pretty new to the national team. But we have also the veterans, Pang Seng-jin and Hua Ting-wen. So Pang Seng-jin and Hua Ting-wen actually started representing Singapore in 2003. Yeah, I was on that team with them. So I think it was a really great mix because you can pass on the knowledge and experience to the youth because, I mean, they are our future. So I think it was a really great team to have.
Talking about youth, we do have a lot of talented youth in our ranks for swimming, with Jonathan Tan and Mikael Lee both making history by qualifying for the 50-meter freestyle finals in the FINA World Junior Championships. Coming up next, some highlights from the Sultan of Selangor Cup, so don't go away just yet. Over 1,000 Singapore fans were up at the Shah Alam Stadium to catch the Sultan of Selangor Cup.
3 matches now make up the Sultan of Selangor Championships, and it starts off with the under-15, and the Singapore under-15 team took on the Selangor under-15 team, and they took the lead, looked very bright, but then eventually it went down to a 3-1 defeat. So not the best match for Philip Au, and of course his team will look forward to the under-16 AFC qualifiers coming up later in September. And then followed that is actually the match that most of the fans look forward to, not the official match, the veterans match, where players and legends of the game take to the field a little fatter, a little slower, but still with the skills, and the Singapore veterans coming out tops on a penalty shootout, and Yazid Yassin, former Singapore international, coming out with 2 big penalty saves. So at least there was a victory for Singapore in the Sultan of Selangor's Cup. The main match didn't go their way, just a single goal separating the two sides. They huffed and they puffed, but just couldn't find the breakthrough, the main Singapore selection side.
That's right, Duncan. I did catch some of the highlights as well. I think pretty exciting matches in spite of the match not having that many goals. 2 great saves by Yazid Yassin, and our youth, even though falling 3-1 to the under-15s, falling 3-1 to Selangor FA, plenty to look forward to, many opportunities ahead, like you said. What is the current score between Selangor and Singapore?
Singapore had the opportunity to level it, but they lost, and now Selangor go up by 2, so it's 9 wins to Selangor, 7 to Singapore. They did share the trophy somewhere in between due to the haze situation a few years back, but next year it's back in Singapore, and time for Singapore to get that victory. Welcome back to Sport on Singapore, and now our focus turns to hockey and the final of the Challenge Cup. And first of all, let's touch on the male competition, the National Hockey League 1 Cup between Jansenites and Singapore Khalsa Association. Very tight affair, settled by 1 goal, and Jean, you were there. You played in the Women's Challenge, which we'll talk about later, but in the final for the men's, Jansenites with the victory, just 1 goal. You were there. Explain to us how that happened, how the victory came about.
So the game was actually very close because both teams were quite on par, and there were actually plenty of opportunities for both teams to score, but they both defended really well also. So I think eventually it led up to a 1-0, it led to a last minute goal, it was like decided by a penalty stroke. It's like sort of like a foul in our game, and I think kudos to both teams for the amazing performance, and it was a good end to the league. Yeah.
There's plenty of excitement in the women's final as well, which Jean, you competed in, Team Hockey Innovative, winning on penalties against Holland after a 2-2 draw, which was an end-to-end match. Jean, you in particular were involved both in the first goal that the team conceded as well as scoring the winning penalty eventually. Talk us through how it felt for you, the range of emotions you felt from the beginning to the end of the match.
Basically, we've played Holland twice before these finals, so we knew exactly what we were up against, and they are a very strong side. So it was a really close game, and I think the goals that my team conceded was like a moment of mistake and like a lack of focus. So personally, I think that for me, I kept telling myself that I had to stay focused so that we could get back the goal, and eventually it led to the penalty shootout, which we also won in. So I think it's actually a very good experience. I think it was a good exposure for the younger players in our team to play against such a strong side in a club game, and we're looking forward to play them again next year.
We're going to briefly touch on Floorball as well in the Youth Floorball League final. Very handsome Youngers narrowly missing out in a 7-goal thriller against Ini Bandi Prodigy. How about that, Duncan?
Yes, fantastic action at our Tampines hub for the Youth Floorball League. It's the first ever league for floorball in Singapore, and I think it's been started due to the conception of the Under-19 national floorball team. So this is the perfect platform for scouts and for coaches to look at players coming up through the ranks and for them to be part of the Under-19 national floorball team. So floorball really a sport that's up and coming, along with hockey, of course.